All right. It's so good to see you all. Maybe instead of doing introductions right now, I'll just have you introduce yourself when you talk a little bit about your panel. And I would encourage any of you on, whether current scholar or former scholar to reach out to each other to connect as well. Um, I just shared the link again to the Scholar database that is on the Google Drive that you all have access to. As a reminder, try to keep that as up to date as possible with your email address, phone number. I'll share that again here um, in the chat just so that you all can have that. And if you need to update it, please do so. But for the sake of time, we won't necessarily go around and do introductions. And I'd love to jump right in because I do have several questions and I know the scholars have questions too. So for any of our alums that are here, if you could introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about, your time at IC, so your majors and minors, and then what your fellowship is or was. Does anybody want to go first?
I'll go.
Thanks, Laura.
Hi, everybody. It feels so good to see all y'all beautiful faces. My name is Laura Waxman. If I don't know you, and when I was at IC, I graduated May 2019, yes. So when I was at IC, I was an environmental studies major and an international politics minor. And now I am at Uprose, an environmental and climate justice organization in Brooklyn, New York, where I'm from. So yeah, that's what I have to share. I'm gonna pass it on is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna pass it on to Candace.
I knew you were gonna say that. Hi everyone, I'm Candace, she, her pronouns. I graduated May 2019, just like Laura, part of cohort 1. I majored in public and community health with a minor, or sorry, I didn't have a minor. I had a concentration in politics and like architecture and a little bit of public health stuff. It was like a mixture of green spaces, environmental justice-esque things. And I had my fellowship at the Praxis Project, which is based in Oakland, California. And I'm still in Oakland, California because I still work with the Praxis Project. So I'm gonna pass it to Hannah.
Hi everyone, my name is Hannah Kayam. I also use she, her pronouns. And I graduated from IC, cohort 1. I graduated from IC in December 2020. I was a dual major student in vocal performance and music education, so it was a 4.5-year program. And then from January through August, so 8 months, I did my fellowship with a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. called The Musicianship, and their goal is to provide tuition-free music education to students who need it most. And I currently I live in Ithaca. I moved back here, and I currently teach K through 4 general music in Lansing.
Hannah, do you want to pass it to someone?
Oh, who else? Should I pass it to anyone? Okay, I'm passing it to Audrey.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I just graduated in May. I was in cohort 2. My major was sociology, double minors in counseling and Spanish. I forgot already. And my fellowship is based in New York City. It's with College and Community Fellowship. So we worked with women who have been involved in the justice system, either previously convicted or incarcerated, whatever it may be, and help them get whatever degree that they want to get. So I will pass it on to Kelly.
Hi everyone, it's lovely to see everyone in one space, I guess. I'm Kelly, she, her pronouns. I was also in cohort 2 with Audrey. I'm currently remotely doing my fellowship in Auburn, which is about 45 minutes from Ithaca, and I am with the Active Minds. So if those of you still on campus are familiar with Active Minds, we just work to provide programming, transparency, advocacy around high school and college students' mental health, just mostly like suicide prevention and such. But they're based out of DC, but they closed the office for the foreseeable future, but remote work is fun. I like it. Markeisha, do you want to go?
Sure, thanks. Hi, everyone. It's so great to see you all. I'm Markeisha Morgan. I graduated in May last year. Was it last year? I think it was this year, earlier this year. Currently, I'm doing my Bowl Fellowship with Florida Youth Shine. They work under the umbrella of Florida's Children First, and they're a youth advocacy organization advocating for the rights of youths within the welfare system. And like Kelly, I'm also remotely right now. Yeah, did I say my majors? I think I did. Yeah. Majored in legal studies with a minor in communication studies. And I'll pass it over to Ashay.
Hi everyone, it's nice to see you all. My name is Ashay. I go by she, her pronouns. I graduated this May. I'm a part of cohort 2. My major was documentary studies and production with a minor in writing. I currently am doing my fellowship. I'm remote right now, but I'm doing my fellowship with Global Fund for Women. They're international grant-making organization that funds feminist and women rights organizations across the globe.
I see Claire just joined us and Diana is here too.
I can pass it to Diana.
I think she said she was commuting home, so I don't know if she can hear.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Hello, just got home. I was out grocery shopping and time went. But my name is Diana. I'm a part of cohort 2, and I am a community outreach fellow at Unlocal, which is a nonprofit based in the city that helps to provide legal resources to undocumented immigrants, as well as provide community outreach in terms of like know your rights, presentations, helping folks, be aware of their rights and like different programs in the city available for them. And yeah, I'm in New York City and I'm working remotely right now as well. Is anyone else?
Claire, if you can share just introduce yourself and share your major, minors while you were at IC and what you did for your internship. Claire, can you hear me? All right, we'll come back to Claire. Thank you all so much for being here. It's so good to see all of your faces and hear your voices, and I'm really excited for you all to be able to share about your fellowships with the current 3rd and 4th cohorts of scholars. So there's about 9 of you, I think, and I have about 10 questions or so to go through. So for the sake of time and wanting to make sure that you all get a chance to share, you don't necessarily have to answer every question. If you feel like you have something, different, unique to share, definitely we want to hear from you. But if you feel like what you might have had to say had already been shared by somebody else, no need to share that again. And we'll get started. So this list of questions was curated by the 3rd and 4th cohorts of scholars, but of course, you all should feel free to jump in and unmute yourselves or put questions in the chat as well. This isn't formal at all. Hi, Claire. So feel free to jump in. Claire, do you need a couple minutes? Okay, it looks like she's talking to someone. We'll give her a few minutes. So the first question was, did you always know that you wanted to do a fellowship, or did you have other plans when you started in the BOLD program, whether grad school or finding a job after graduation?
I can jump in. I'm sure. I know my cohort has stuff to contribute to this question. I knew that I wanted to pursue a fellowship, and I talked to Candace about it quite a bit, I believe, over the winter. So definitely, if any of you are considering it, like, use this network to your advantage and ask the older cohorts, because we would love to share and guide you. I also kind of looked for jobs, so like, by all means, if you feel like you can handle those things at the same time, like, do your best to handle that. Um, yeah, I was lucky enough to like be really heavily involved with Active Minds throughout college, like both at the local and national level. So I always kind of knew in the back of my head that I was hoping to take that work into kind of the professional realm. So if any of you have something you're really passionate about, like whether it's in the Ithaca community or now in your like hometown communities, try to see if you can kind of like elevate that, if you want to stay connected with those folks. So yeah, I kind of always knew I wanted to pursue a fellowship, but also looked for jobs parallel to that.
I can jump.
Oh,
You can go, Candace.
okay. I'm just going to say this because I feel like cohort 2 probably has a little bit more of the variance of deciding between things, just because for cohort 1, we were all kind of guaranteed a fellowship. So there wasn't much competition between slots. So I think for us, it was like once this was offered, it was kind of a no-brainer for us. But I do think like some folks in our cohort definitely were deciding between graduate school jobs and fellowship, but you know, free money was kind of very enticing for us. So I think that's why most of us jumped on the opportunity. So I would love to hear from cohort 2 as well.
Yeah, I think similar to Kelly, because there were more of us than there were fellowship opportunities. I'm someone who's likes to plan and for the worst. So I made sure to apply for jobs while doing my fellowship applications, you know, just in case. I think it's important to have both options, as well as applying to positions that may open up with the org you're interested in. So maybe you don't get to pursue a fellowship with them, but like, you know, there are chances that they also have similar job openings, and you know that you get to jump in right away. So yeah, I try to have a good balance of both. Keep in mind, you know, that grad school can also be an option. I know certain career paths almost like lead to that right away. Yeah, and just making sure you weigh all your options.
Yeah, I want to bounce off of that. Going off of what Candace said, there was funding for hypothetically everyone in cohort 1 to do a fellowship. But I was in a position where I mentioned before, I was in a 4.5-year program. So I kind of had this weird, you know, time frame, especially because I went to school to be a teacher, where I could be a long-term sub, or, you know, I could have, I don't know, I could have kind of tried to find something in the specific realm of education, but I worked with Sam, and Sam worked, you know, kind of with me and with the nonprofit I was hoping to work with, and with Bold, to change the time frame from 12 months to 8 months. So I don't know, you know, how widely acceptable that is, but if you're in a position where you might, you know, have some, you know, if you graduate a semester before like the next year starts or something like that, I thought this was a great opportunity for me to do work in my field while you know, making a productive use of that time, you know, because if you graduate in December and you kind of have that like chunk of time, you're like, ah. So not sure what your programs are, but if you're in that boat as well, I would think about you know, using this fellowship opportunity to do meaningful work before the next school year starts, if that is important to your career field.
Really quickly, thanks, Hannah, for adding that. And I mean, this is still all so new, right? Like, we only have 2 cohorts of scholars that have done fellowships. So, you know, we try to think of things and stuff that might come up for you all, but you know your own situation's best. So if you have a unique circumstance, just, you know, reach out to me and we'll talk about it. As Hannah mentioned, like, as I've shared with you all, the timeline is flexible. So if you want to do 12 months from December to December, if that's what works for you, or, you know, if you need to do less than 12 months because you have an upcoming commitment, whether grad school or a standard job search process, like Hannah, as a teacher, knew that come August, September, that's when teaching positions start. So Hannah, I think not only did you start late because of your program going until December, but we also were flexible about with the end date because of your field that you're in. Anything else to add to, did you always know you wanted to do a fellowship, or maybe what was the deciding factor that made you decide that a fellowship was definitely for you?
I mean, in my case, when we figured out that there was a fellowship opportunity for us, I was like, yep, that's gonna be me. I mean, right after school, it's much more simple to go down that route, honestly, because you know that you have to find a nonprofit that you want to be at for 1 year in your field, and it aligns with bold and possibly what you study. So it was something that I was extremely looking forward to. And so I knew I wanted to do the fellowship. I also knew that I wanted to do grad school, but I knew that I could always do grad school after, in my case. So yeah.
I think for me, my situation was a little bit different. The fellowship was not my first choice. And I think there's like maybe two other people on this call who might like kind of get where I'm coming from. So I'm an international student, and so for me, it was much more important to find a job that would be able to like sponsor me after my 1 year was up, so that I would be able to stay in the States potentially. So a fellowship was not necessarily my first go-to option. Just because I knew that like whatever nonprofit I would be working at probably would not have the capacity to hire me long term, and to go through that process. But what changed my mind was that I felt like even if in the event that I wasn't able to get sponsored, I would still have the ability to do meaningful work for a year in my field, at a place of my choice. And I felt like that was very fulfilling. And I had a year to do something that was worth my time and worth my energy, and that would make me feel fulfilled, and that would give me very much needed experience. So I kind of decided that through the push of others as well, that I'd go for a fellowship.
Is that me, Ashay?
Yeah. And Markeisha.
Thank you all. So the next question then is, and I'll start posting them in the chat too, because I don't know about you all, but sometimes by the time I'm like the fourth person to speak, I forget what the question was. So how did you go about deciding what you were interested in, and how did you find your fellowships? Because I know like for each cohort and for upcoming cohorts, it's like kind of anxiety provoking when we're like any nonprofit, and you have to think like, okay, like what now? So can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
So for me, I always knew I wanted to do something related to the legal field, something in law. And I think that's also a problem of mine. So I was trying more of not to just the criminal aspect, but trying to find like another area of interest. So for example, I knew that like trans rights was something I always cared about, but at the same time, I was just like, I don't know if it's necessarily the right path to go down. And so I started, when I was researching, I started looking for opportunities and I wanted to be in Florida because I feel like I like Florida and I like Florida. So I started researching offices in Florida that would be able to like take on a fellow. And Florida UChine wasn't to, I was reaching out to a lot of other organizations, but then it came down to the unique name Florida UChine. So with Florida UChine, I was able to work with both Florida's Children First and Florida UChine. So I was working on the legal aspect of like legislative advocacy, as well as working with the, oh, I'm breaking up. Oh, I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi connection. As well as working with the youths living within the welfare system. So that's how I chose FYS.
think like Markeisha raises a good point, at least in our cohort. Most of us chose fellowships that were related to like a social justice issue that we're passionate about. And it also kind of intersects with most of like our degree backgrounds. I forgot to say I was a psychology major with sociology and counseling minors, and I work for a mental health nonprofit, so that intersected really well. I know, Diana, your fellowship intersects very well with your interests and degree. So I had a very abnormal case because I was already established with a nonprofit in college. So I guess I'm kind of like the outlier, but I think just really picking what you're passionate about and kind of like Markeisha said, like geographically maybe where you want to be, and seeing how those can intersect.
One thing that Dr. Gonzalez, who was our bold advisor for cohort 1, told us when we were thinking about what organization we might want to work with is, where will you actually make a difference, and like where will you not just be another intern, or not just be someone else that's already in an internship program or fellowship program. So that was a big thing I considered. As you know, I'm a music teacher, and I studied music ed in school, and I wanted to work for a music nonprofit that uplifted the bold mission, and a lot of those nonprofits have already an established internship program. They already feed through hundreds of people in their offices a week and things like that. So I ended up, I was the first intern or fellow ever at the nonprofit I worked for, which had its ups and its downs, but they only had 5 full-time employees. So I worked directly with the CEO all the time. My direct supervisor oversaw all of the youth programming that we did all across Washington, D.C. So I think another thing to think about, like Kelly said, is what are you good at? What are you passionate about? What did you study? But also, where are you not just going to be another number? Where are you not just going to be someone else that they push work to? Where will they know you, and where will you really, make a difference?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Hannah. And I would suggest actually, so my fellowship aligned really well with my major and like what I'm passionate about, and aligned really great with the mission of BOLS. And I think that's also really important to factor in, is like, does that align with what you have been doing over the last 2 years? And are you, like, the things that you learned through your campus impact project and the things that you've learned through facilitation, are they going to translate into a practical practice at whatever location you're going to be at? So I was looking for a nonprofit that worked in public health but had a very strong social justice, very strong movement, organizing, racial equity lens. And it was hard because there's so many organizations. I highly suggest using idealist.org, especially if you know you're not going to be staying home or moving. Like, I moved from like across the country. I'm from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I live in Oakland, California now. So it took a lot of like discerning and like reading through mission statements and getting in contact with people, and also be, when you're starting the engagement and communication with potential host organizations, look at the way that they're messaging you and talking to you from the jump. So if they see you potential and like you being an asset to the organization, that's great. But if they kind of see this as like, oh great, we'll just have an intern, you might want to be a little wary of that and kind of look for someplace that really would benefit from the things that you've learned in undergrad and the things that you're passionate about. Yeah,
I think that was why I knew I wanted to go into small org, more grassroots led. Just because, at a bigger company, you just become another employee. And going back to like how I like decided I want to do my internship. So I didn't mention this, but I'm a journalism major. So like it doesn't really translate directly to nonprofit. But I was more hoping to follow my minors / like my passion projects and what I did on campus. So if you're like a math major and like you don't want to do a math like centered fellowship, like that's cool too. Like I would encourage folks to do like the thing that even scares you the most. You're like, sometimes we're told not to follow what we would actually want to do. So yeah, if you have like an interest or what you've worked on campus, off campus, I would suggest going for it. And honestly, like, to find my nonprofit, I just like Googled like immigration nonprofits New York City like 100 times, and got a big list. Sam was really, really helpful in finding other people who have also made lists. So I would like sit through like big PDFs and just like highlight names that were interesting to me, go on their websites, go on their social medias, sign up for their newsletter, just to see how they engage with the community and how active they are. And that was really, really helpful in narrowing my process down.
Just really quickly too, I want to add that how I went about finding my fellowship and was with the network that I had. So I think it was when I was a junior, I was interning for the Office of Sustainability and Management, and I had the chance to meet the distinguished speaker for the sustainability series that was going on that year. And so I connected with him, and he was the one that was like, do you know about UpRose, which is the organization I'm at now? Do you know about UpRose? Connect with UpRose. And this was when I was a junior. And so right when I was a senior towards the end of the year and I was looking for nonprofits, I connected with him again and had him help me connect with the organization. So really connect with the people that you feel like are in your field, or even that you're interested in, people that stand out to you.
Super important to start networking already, even for the juniors, and even just starting to do like informational interviews. So if there's organizations or sectors, fields that you think you might even possibly be interested, reach out to those folks and ask if you can schedule just like a half-hour meeting with them just to get to know them and about the work they do and start to build those networks out. In the chat, there's going about, working with your professors in the field and any other opportunity that you get to meet people and make connections.
Could I also just jump in and ask a quick question?
Yeah.
For anyone who was like a STEM major or minor, how did you go about like finding a nonprofit that was good for what you wanted, but also good for maybe like your transcript and, CV or resume going into grad school? Because I'm looking to get that work experience that a fellowship could offer, but I also kind of like have to go to grad school.
Sierra, what is your STEM leaning? Just asking.
I'm physics and astronomy.
Physics, okay. I was gonna say if it was more like bio or medically leaning, there are a bunch of like nonprofits.
Yeah.
But I would say this about like STEM or any STEM major or any people interested in STEM. There are a lot of, you're starting to see more left-leaning tech and STEM companies popping up doing more equitable work in those areas because they tend to be cis male centric. And so there are smaller organizations or startups that could benefit from like your lens. So it makes your search a little bit harder, but I don't think it's impossible. And maybe you need to start looking or maybe start searching where those hubs and locations are across the country, because it might not be like in the most traditional like metropolitan areas, or it might be in those huge metropolitan areas. So I would just really define your search and make it super narrow so that you can start finding potential places.
Yeah, thank you so much, Candace. I was actually just talking to Sam, just for anyone else like possibly thinking about this, doing an international fellowship also, just because that's what I had planned to do for grad school as well. So yeah, that is actually very useful information. Thank you so much.
I want to add for you, Sierra, that when I was at IC, I was a part of the Office of State Grants, and they have a program called CSTEP. Not sure if you know about it. That's the Collegiate Science Technology Entry Program. So basically it's STEM for historically disadvantaged people of color. And through there is a a large network, and I can even pass you on one of my mentors when I was at IC. Her name is Tiffany Valentine, and she has a lot of information for what her students who have graduated have went on to, or internships and fellowships that they have done. And so I know that at CSTEP, there's a lot of information as well of people that were in STEM majors. And since I was in environmental studies, not necessarily environmental science, but I still was a part of that hub. So yeah, check them out. And I'm gonna put Tiffany's name in the chat because she's really cool. And if you talk to Tiffany, just be like, Laura sent me to you.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay, so the next question. So the scholars were interested in hearing about what it's been like to be in this fellowship position and the dynamic of your office, and whether you've been kind of like accepted as like a full-time staff member on your team, or if you've been kind of considered separate or othered in any sort of way, as you know, with your fellowship status. And if you were not accepted fully into your staff, how did you manage that?
I think I can speak a little bit about this. I think my situation is slightly unique in that my fellowship position is filling a job position at the org that they had and someone left. So I feel like I've been treated like I'm on the staff, but they're also very cognizant of the fact that I just graduated and this is very much a learning experience for me. So they've been kind of sort of babysitting me, which I appreciate. Like, it's not unwelcome. They kind of guide me through everything so far, and they're kind of letting me take the reins now as we keep going forward, which has been very helpful. I forgot the rest of the question. So yes, I was treated differently, but in a beneficial way, if that makes sense. I made it clear that I needed the help, and they provided it, so.
I'll pop in just to talk about office dynamic. I think one thing that I didn't consider when I was looking at organizations is office location or lack thereof. So the nonprofit that I did my 8-month fellowship with was entirely, they have no office. So even before COVID, I was working from home. That is not something I factored in. You know, it checked all the boxes. It was a great city. It was a great, you know, great, nice people. They were doing the work I wanted to do. It was like, yes, check, check. Awesome, awesome. And then it can be very isolating to be in a new city where you don't have people and working, you know, and you can connect with people in like your little video chat, like your little, you know, your weekly check-in. But if that gets postponed or something, I would go like weeks without seeing anyone I worked with. So I would say that's also something to consider if you're looking at fellowships as like, well, is there a physical office? You know, how would I get to the physical office compared to where I live? I was commuting in and out of Washington, D.C. to teach in different locations across the city. So how will I get to the different places? I also didn't factor in how much the metro costs. The metro is way more expensive. I'm from Boston. It's way more expensive than the T. So I was spending like upwards of $20 on Metro, you know, every single week. So just something else to keep in mind of like not only office dynamic, but office location and other types of transportation, things that I didn't really know. And I don't know if other people in cohort 1 thought about those things. And I was just, you know, I don't know, I was clueless, but just a word to the wise, you know, considering what the office setup is as well as something that is good. And it's different during COVID. I know it's different, but you know, if we ever return back to a more normal state, you know, something important to keep in mind.
For me, so I am like month 2.5 of my fellowship right now. I started back in August, and they threw me like right in there, like week 1. They had me doing the presentation with someone else on the education outreach team, and they gave me like my plate of responsibilities, which was like really great, just because I felt like I was, I guess, given into the team really fast, but it was also overwhelming because I definitely had a big list of things to do right away. And, you know, and I think they were really excited for me to jump on board. That being said, it took me a while to ask questions, and there were times where I definitely needed to ask someone because I wasn't unsure. So definitely ask all the questions. It is okay to ask for help. So yeah, I think pros and cons to being thrown in right away versus like, you know, taking a step back. But I, for the most part, have been integrated pretty well with Unlocal. I feel like here and there I'm still referred to as like the Ithaca Fellow, which is just like kind of funny because, you know, that's like the term they've coined. But yeah.
I think I can add to all of that. I'm sorry. I've been like in and out. I'm running a phone bank right now with a bunch of returning volunteers. I currently work for the Biden campaign in the Colorado Democratic Party, which is like wild. Wild turn of events in this lifetime right now. But yeah, I did an internship and fellowship at Metro Justice in Rochester, New York. I did a summer fellowship and similar to, I think, what Hannah was saying, it was like a really good experience work-wise, but definitely had its moments that were scary with getting thrown into the work and also like living in a city where I didn't know a lot of people. I ended up living in an apartment that was probably like a 15-minute bike ride from my office, and I like didn't have a car at the time, and I was like, oh, I'll just bike to work every day, it'll be fine. I didn't factor into like, they were like, we want you to go to the refugee like meeting with this coalition, which was like an hour bike ride across town. And I was like, okay, do I like sit on my bike for an hour, or do I like try and take an Uber that's really expensive, or do I try and take public transportation that's unreliable? And so being like very prepared for the fact that even though I was working in an office on a daily basis, if you're doing something like community organizing especially, or campaigning, they're gonna have you every which way, and they're going to use you to your full capacity. I was the only full-time intern out of 3 or 4 interns, and everyone else was part-time. So anytime anyone else was like, oh, my 15 hours are up, they were like, oh, Claire can do it. Like, she's getting paid by someone big in an office somewhere. It was like, that was the joke. But it was very easy to be like taken advantage of and just thrown things. And while that was like a really good learning experience, really prepared me for what I'm doing now, because campaigning 70 hours a week is more than a full-time job. If anyone's interested in politics, hit me up because I now have way too much information about it. But yeah, I would say get integrated to your space, go where you want to go, but also like look for your resources ahead of time. It's a really huge growing experience to learn what you have and what you don't have, and I think you can, like, you're all capable of landing on your feet. Like, there's no doubt about that in the world. But it can be a growing experience. So yeah, I recommend that. It looks like my volunteers are doing okay now, but I'm gonna just like keep an eye on them.
Thanks, Claire.
I just have like one thing to add to that question before we switch over, Sam. But I think that it's important to have a really good mindset going into your fellowship, because yeah, an org can treat you one way, whether it be like as a fellow or a full-time employee, but I think it also is really important how you step into the fellowship, and like if you want to take it seriously, if you want to take it like a job, you know, like showing up that way really shows your like supervisors and upper people and executive directors that you're committed to doing what you're doing, because we all know that, like, not that I think any of you would do that, but we are being paid by someone else, and you could just like show up half-assed, you know? So it's really about like, if you're committed to the mission that the organization is doing, like, you know, showing up your full self is important too. Yeah.
So you can get hired like Candace.
Exactly.
Lara, I don't know if you want to share a little bit, and you can pass if you don't want to, but I think you have a unique dynamic too in your office, especially with the founder still being the CEO of your organization.
Yeah, so when I came into the organization, a lot like Claire, they were like, bet someone to do all the, like, they always needed more people because of the work that we do. And a lot of nonprofits you will all discover, or that you've already seen, need more and more help. And so I was taken advantage of a lot, but a lot like what I think the next question is going to be that Sam's going to ask. it took a toll on me emotionally, mentally, because I'm told that it's not a 9-to-5 job, which I'm totally okay with, but they will use me up to midnight. They will use me 24 hours, 7 days a week if they wanted to. And so you have to really set boundaries professionally, right? Because like Candace was saying, you don't want to burn any bridges. You don't want to leave a nasty, sour taste in their mouth. So any suggestions that I would have to manage that? In my case, I'm like 10 months in and I still don't have a job description. I really wish that when I was going, right when I entered the organization, that I was way more assertive, even though I thought I was. But I wish I was even more assertive to get what it was that I felt like I needed to succeed. And whether that means that you're speaking with your supervisor or your boss about what it is that you appreciate and like in a working environment, because I'm sure they will tell you in the first few weeks, days that you're there. And so, yeah, you really want to think about how you want your fellowship to go while you're there, which is what I would do differently. Perhaps I would have set certain goals for myself in the beginning of the fellowship and shared that with my boss.
Thank you, Laura. And I think this is common for nonprofit organizations, especially small organizations, especially organizations that have only been around for a few years, that the founder may still be very involved with the organization. And for those of you who've had that experience, I think you can talk about how there's just a dynamic in which they have a certain mission and vision and dream that, you know, help them to start this organization in the first place. And that can, you know, have its pros and cons, and just something to be aware of as you're searching for organizations and setting up those boundaries and expectations. I am conscious of time. I want to do a quick time check. I know a couple people have 7 o'clock commitments, and you are welcome to jump off at 7. But for our fellows, I'm wondering if it would be okay if we go a couple minutes over, at least for some of you. I am recording this, that way anybody can watch it, but I want to check in really quickly.
That's fine.
Okay. All right. So we'll keep going. If anybody has to hop out right at 7 or just before, that's okay. I'll share this with you all after this meeting. Okay. So Laura, I posted question number 5. Laura already started to kind of allude to it, but for a lot of you are doing work that's very emotionally taxing, either the work itself or just your organization in general, maybe because of boundaries, workload, etc. But like, for example, Kelly working around like mental health things, or Markeisha working with youth that have, you know, some really challenging things that they're going through, and many of you have stuff like that. So how do you deal with that emotional toll?
Yeah, I think that I was talking to you about this the other day too, Sam. For me, like, I was an RA, for those who didn't know. So like, we kind of got trained on how to like deal with you know, taking on other people issues. Res life, no retweet to that. But yeah, so for me, my supervisor, she was an RD. And so sometimes like we will have one-on-ones, quote unquote, like she literally calls them one-on-one, and like she will check in to see if I'm okay and how I'm doing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I feel comfortable enough to like share with her. And so when I take on like the heavy topics from the youths, recently I started journaling again. So that's something I use to like help myself cope. And like, I talk to my mom every day, so sometimes I'll just like tell her all that's going on. So that's how I get it out. But definitely find your way to like cope with issues. And if you don't feel comfortable talking with your supervisor, I know that like Sam is also a resource for us as well. So yeah, that's what I do.
I've kind of been leaning on my coworkers more than my supervisor, in order to like, if I need like advice on how to deal with a client, or anything of that nature. it's been helpful for me to just talk to the people who are also doing the same work that I'm doing and working with the same people. And they've obviously have more experience than I do, so they can help me through it, but also just let me vent. I kind of try and keep it professional because I still don't know the dynamics of our relationship yet, and I don't want to step on any toes and put my foot in my mouth. But either way, it does the same job. So I think leaning on coworkers is very helpful.
I don't know about other people. Sorry, my internet cut out for a second. Yeah, in regards to my fellowship, I hear some really triggering content because I work in mental health. About every other day, we're talking about suicide, especially amongst people and folks our age. And we have an exhibit that travels where people showcase their stories about losing loved ones to suicide. So I've found, like Audrey, that leaning on my coworkers for support as a team is most beneficial, but also kind of compartmentalizing what I'm doing at work. So I'm not taking it home with me, especially because it can be really heavy. And I know for at least some folks in cohort 2, we are in fellowships, seeing things and learning things that we might not have grown up with or seen every day. So just learning to compartmentalize what you're talking about. And yeah, I also call my mom a lot Markeisha. So I feel you there, leaning on the other women in my family to talk me through things. But we're all empathetic people, so I feel like we take things in like sponges. So just remind yourself that you don't have to do that, and you can kind of put up your boundaries. So
in my case, I just wanted to add that I noticed that it was my work early on was taking a toll on me because my schedule's from 10 to 6, but I found myself staying over at the office from like 10 to 9, sometimes 10 to 10. And I had to, sometimes you have to be the person in your organization. I had a very small staff. It was like 8, 9 of us. And I was like, guys, we got to take care of ourselves. Like, we can't do this all the time. And if we do go hard, we have to eventually, practice self-care, even if we do that with one another. And so when it got to my boss that I was talking about that, she was like, okay, let's have like healing circles, like every time we have a staff meeting. And so it was getting that time during work that also helped, not only like after. I started a book club within my organization for the staff. So every now and then we can we still talk about environmental justice through the literature that we read, but at least it's like we read like a sci-fi this time, so it's it plays out in another way. So yeah.
Yeah, I would also highly suggest adding some type of like personal or like mental health check-in within your weekly check-ins with your supervisor or whoever or your team that you're working with. Like incorporate, like build that into what you're talking about that week. And then also, I think most of us are working virtually unless you're like on the grounds, like campaigning like Claire's doing. But it's important, especially when you're virtually working, to close your laptop and get away from the screen. Like do it, like set those boundaries. Your hours are from 8 to 5, they're 8 to 5, like turn it off, go walk outside, go read a book, listen to your favorite music. Like I think it's when I first started working virtually, it's so easy to just stay glued to the computer and like send that extra email and keep editing this, or like, oh, I can call this person still. Like, nope, put it down. Just put it down. It'll be there tomorrow. The best thing about a task list is that it doesn't have to be completed. If you write, I have 5 things to do today, it's okay if you only get 3 of them and you have to add those last 2 to the next day. Like, it's perfectly fine. And I think that there's so much pressure, especially within our society, to become workaholics because we do live in a capitalistic society, that it's really okay to be like, no, in order for me to continue to keep doing the work that I need to do, especially in the space of social justice, that you have to be like, no, I'm preserving myself and I'll be back tomorrow. Like, that's okay. So setting those boundaries is super important.
That's awesome advice, Candace, and everybody else in the chat too. I'm really happy that you all are taking this seriously and hopefully, learning that and practicing that early on in your career so that by the time you're 10, 20, 30 years in, it's a well practiced habit.
Oh, and can I just add, I've seen people in my organization who truly do not take care of themselves. It takes a toll on you 10 years in this work. Granted, I know we're looking at 1 year nonprofit experiences, but a lot of us might end up staying there or looking at other nonprofits. And this is a key. Granted, in every work field, you'll have to take care of yourself, but especially in ours.
Yeah, absolutely. If any of you are following along, I'm gonna skip question number 7 and go to number 8, just kind of keeping an eye on time. So number 8 is all the things money and finance. So just as a reminder, cohort 1 got slightly higher salaries than cohort 2 just because of leftover budgets and kind of what they've already talked about, where fellowships for their cohort were guaranteed, and they were a cohort of 9 when they graduated, and there was funding for 10. So that 10th allotment, we didn't realize we could kind of roll money over. We thought we had to use it, and so that cohort got a slightly higher salary. But in general, it will be $40,000 for the year, or internships are $5,000 for the summer. So can you all talk a little bit about that? Like maybe any tips or strategies that you had for budgeting or how you manage that amount of money? Did you do okay? Did you find the need to, maybe get a part-time job? What about taxes? So anything money related.
Yeah, I like to plan. I think Diana said that earlier. I would rather be safe than sorry. So even despite working from home, we all have student loans and other loans. I have a car loan. It's just like loan after loan after loan because capitalism, like Candace said. But I think planning to save more than you think you need to, because you have to individually deduct your taxes. Sam, I think, did you say to save 20% or 25%?
The suggestion is 25% from cohort 1, and any of you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think with the rate that you're getting paid that it actually ended up being 25%. I think it's significantly less than that, maybe closer to like, what is it, 18% maybe that you actually ended up paying. But I think 25% is still a good buffer. And it's just a good practice anyways to save if life happens, right? And you need some extra money for something that comes up.
Yeah, I definitely am probably more than I actually will end up needing for taxes, but I hope that you all take that advice just in case anything comes up as well. But I mean, I utilize Google spreadsheets, and I might be a little anal retentive, but I try to plan this is rent, these are utilities, car payment, and just be on top of it. And if you have to write things down, yeah, I like to see it all laid out. But I personally, in my situation, felt like I had a sufficient amount of money to work with. And I think, yeah, I feel comfortable. I was lucky enough to not need a part-time job, but once in a while I babysit to supplement that. But really interested to see what other folks have to say.
Yeah, I think what Kelly said just about having a budget is really, really helpful. I know for me, because especially since you get paid like quarterly, you're not getting paid every 2 weeks or every month. So it's really essential that you kind of lay out your expenses for the next 3 months, which is what I do. And so it's very helpful. For me, it was a little bit tricky managing with the amount of money that we got, just because I moved to New York City, and I kind of had to get a new place, get supplies, get other things, and that would prove kind of costly. But I think it is a workable budget if you do know how to budget well. So budgeting is essential. Make sure you budget. And don't spend on frivolous things either. That money is not for frivolous things. Yeah.
If you are moving or looking to go across the country or move to a different state, pre-planning your first installment to make sure that you're able to pay for first month security, travel, storage, packing, like if you're like taking a trailer or whatever, plane tickets, that thing, those types of upfront costs, like you want to be mindful of those if you aren't going to be staying close to home. The second thing that I would suggest is like when you are looking for housing and you are on a fixed income, stay true to your budget for housing. Make sure that it's not 3 times your monthly income at all. Factor in transportation. Especially if you don't have a car and you will be utilizing public trans, look at monthly passes and see if your organization would even supplement you for transportation. Luckily mine did, so I never paid for BART, which is like our metro here, for work and my commute, and that was like within my pay. And I think that you should be able to negotiate that type of agreement with your host org. And there are a bunch of like Facebook groups, especially for larger cities, people looking for houses under a certain budget. I will get the exact name of them, but like it'll like you can only enter the group if you meet certain criteria of like you can't afford rent over $1,000. And so then you're able to just negotiate and network with people that are also within that bucket or willing to have a room for rent that can fit your budget, and those are really helpful. And then also don't touch your tax money. If you have a checkings account or a savings account, every quarter put that estimated amount into savings. I saved around $5,000 plus for taxes, and I only paid $4,400, I think, and that included state and local and federal taxes. So there was a little buffer, not too much, but I would suggest sticking to the 25%.
So just to jump in really quickly on taxes. So Candace, that's what you paid this year in April based on what you made in 2019, right? So you'll likely have to
so I have to pay again. So that's another thing to be mindful. I still have taxes that I'm paying for the rest of the fiscal year of 2020. So that money is also aside. So when I started my job, I still wasn't like, oh, I have all this money to spend. Let me go move. Let me get a car. No, it's still in savings. I still have taxes to pay. And I'm still going to pay more taxes than Donald Trump, and that sucks, but whatever.
So Candace, that'll end up being about $9,000 spread out between the 2 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
So just doing the math really quickly, that's about 19.5% total from the cohort 1 was just about $46,000 that they got for the year. So it's about 19.5%. So again, if you can put aside that 25%, I think that's a really good estimate. And again, that gives you a little bit of a buffer. Everybody's taxes are going to be slightly different, but it's a good buffer just to make sure that you're not in a position where you owe money that you don't have anymore.
And one thing about money and budgeting was so I was living in DC, well, not in DC, outside DC in Maryland, commuting in and out of DC. And I definitely panic called Sam because I was like, this money, it's going so quickly because the cost of living is just way higher than I'm used to. Even living in Boston, even living in Ithaca, Washington, D.C. is so expensive to live in. So one piece of advice Sam gave me that was really helpful was think of this fellowship not as a year of savings. I'm a saver, I'm a planner, and so I like to be like, oh, I'm going to save this much, I'm going to come out this much ahead, but kind of just accepting that you're not going to save as much as you want to helped me, kind of be at peace. Like Kelly said, I also was a part-time nanny, which really helped me feel more comfortable, like going out for drinks or going out to eat, like doing those things that kind of took a little bit of stress off my plate to know that I had that little extra income. If you like kids, care.com is a great place to pick up some extra money. They also have like dog sitting, house sitting, just like driving kids places. Don't do it if you hate it, but it's all over, and you can make one account, and if you have good reviews, then it's just a good way to pick up money, in a safe way. Generally, you gotta use your smarts about who you babysit for, but just my thoughts on that.
All right. And I'll post questions 7 and 9 together because they're kind of related. So what are your plans for after your fellowship? Or maybe you've already finished, and or how has your fellowship prepared you for that next step?
You
Go,
go.
Diana.
You go.
Fine. So the question was, what are your plans for after the fellowship?
Yeah.
So I plan to go to grad school right after I'm done. So I'm currently in the process of applying right now. But that was strategically planned because I knew I wanted a gap year. So I knew going into the fellowship that I would have to spend my time after work planning my applications, letters of reference. I planned ahead of time for that. It's been a little stressful because I'm late in the game. Like even though that I want to go fall 2021, applications are due like in December, and I didn't know that. So definitely plan ahead if you're going to go to grad school. Make sure you have your letters of reference set. And then how do you feel like? I feel like my fellowship is almost directly linking to, because I'm going to go into social work, so it kind of goes hand in hand. I also feel like having the fellowship prepared me and gave me a good boost on my application process. Now that I have work in the field before going to grad school, I think it was a great opportunity for me, and also to put on my resume. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm not sure if like grad school is in probably in like distant future, but it's not what I'm looking about right now. So by my second week of work, I was already thinking about what I'm gonna do next year, which like honestly don't do. I don't think it's worth panicking, planning so far ahead of the game. So I'm trying to give myself a bit more time, maybe like halfway through, to start thinking about, okay, what's next. That being said, whenever I do see like a link come up that's like, in a fellowship opportunity I would be interested in, or if like I do a lot of partner work, so like if I see a partner call with an org I really enjoyed working with, I kind of like write that on a Google Doc just to have as an idea for like new job openings or like new fellowship placements. So yeah, I would recommend trying to stay in the moment. Don't panic for the next year so early on. As well as like my goal is to like midway through to have an open conversation with my boss about like, is it possible to rehire me? Like, is this something that you're financially able to do? I think it's worth having those conversations because, sometimes you could be rehired like Candace was. And sometimes you're at a baby org that has 10 employees and like they're barely making it by. So I think to be open and transparent is really, really important as well.
Yeah, I would suggest don't freak out your first 3 months of your fellowship about what you're going to be doing a year from now. Honestly, just immerse yourself in the experience because you never know like who you'll meet through the fellowship that could lead you to another position or a job. And if you're freaking out about the future and the current, you're not experiencing the current day. So I would highly suggest, like waiting until about the 6-month mark, about deciding whether or not you want to have that type of open conversation with your host organization about staying, especially if you're not thinking about graduate school afterwards, but continuing to work. And then like your last 3 months, I would say that's when you can start like vigorously looking for jobs, looking for opportunities, because most jobs aren't going to be hiring 6 months out for a position. At max, they'll probably be looking like 3 to 2 months if there is an opening. And then also, if you're having a good experience at your organization, use them for references, because you've been working for free essentially for them for the last year. So they'll have a lot to say about the quality of work that you've brought to an organization. And then if you are planning to stay with the org that you had your fellowship with, don't be afraid to negotiate your salary. Don't be afraid to ask for what you're worth, because you have been there for a year, and that shows a lot of commitment. So you have a lot of leverage, especially if they are offering you the job to stay, because you could say like, no, I'm not going to stay. You guys aren't paying me enough or whatever. So don't be afraid, just because you've had that relationship and you've been working for free, to not ask what you're worth. And especially since we're working on such a fixed budget, if you want to live in a better living condition, or be able to go to that grocery store and buy food without scraping pennies, like really take into account like what you need to feel comfortable. And yeah, if you have any tips, I was on the plan call when they talked about negotiating salaries. I thought that was really good. When I negotiated my salary, the thing that I said was something along the lines of like, when they told me the first number, I was like, is this the full amount that you guys have budgeted for this position? And that puts the employer in a position to say, well, no, actually we have a little bit more money and we can pay you this, without it being like, I'm asking for $60,000, you know? So it's completely fine. Don't feel weird. And if you have any questions about that, honestly, like reach out to me about negotiations, anything, whatever. A few of you rang me up and it's fine.
Go ahead, Laura.
Okay, I just wanted to echo what Diana was saying. I think that was brilliant that you're taking notes of other places or people that you want to stay in contact with. I find myself doing the same thing, just because a lot of nonprofits, including mine, are going to be a part of probably an alliance of other orgs like them. And so if you take note of other organizations that you partner with or that you hear about in whatever meetings and that interest you, that way later you can look into them for any reason. So yeah, I just wanted to second that, because that's really brilliant.
And also, don't be afraid to, one thing that was part of my goals that I created with my supervisor during my fellowship was professional development outside of our org. So one thing that she did was, my supervisor and I spoke about things I might be interested in, and she served as kind of like an intermediate to set up appointments or meetings where I could interview and speak with other folks who were, they worked with us, but it wasn't what our work was. For example, I was working with a music nonprofit, and one person that I spoke with was the director of the DC Public Schools music department. So another aligned with the work we were doing, someone that we had worked with and had a partnership with, but someone whose career path was a little bit different. So I would encourage you, if you are in a meeting with someone or you're in a call and you really appreciate what they have to say, ask your supervisor, hey, would you mind, sending them an email? I would love to speak with them more. You are an intern or a fellow, but also don't be afraid to get out of it, get out of it what you can. And like Laura and Candace were saying, ask for that extra transportation money, ask, because what's the worst they can say? They can say no. My nonprofit gave me nothing. They didn't give me any transportation money. They didn't give me any benefits. And that was what they were capable of. But the worst thing that they said was, no, that's already the position I was in. So, don't be afraid to put it out there. And also don't be afraid to use your colleagues as team members for you. If you're concerned that you're not getting, if you're for me, one example is my boss always canceled my weekly check-in. So I asked my other colleagues, I was like, is this also happening to you? And, don't be afraid to ask these folks that, even though I was at the bottom of the totem pole, even if you're at the bottom of the totem pole, it's okay to, to check in with colleagues, and also to ask for what you want and to advocate for yourself. like you are your best advocate in this fellowship, and you'll get out of it like what Candace was saying and what Laura was saying. Like if you kind of just go in and you're like, then that's what you're gonna get out of it. But if you go in full-hearted, the nonprofit I worked with, they don't have enough money to hire another full-time employee, but they offered me a contracting position. So maybe it's not what, maybe you're not going to get a full-time thing out of it, and that's okay. But see what you're going to do. I'm going to move back to DC hopefully this summer and work for their summer program and be a program manager again. So, like there are things that could be a continuation that's not exactly what you're doing, or, a full-time job or something like that. So just my 2 cents.
A quick tip when you're in that point with the fellowship, asking for their handbook is really helpful, because then you see what they offer their full-time employees, what days they have off, what benefits they get yearly, and then being straight up and asking, like, as a fellow, do I have the same perks as full-time employees, like AE, like transportation money, professional development money? So I think it's definitely important to keep that on hand.
Thank you all for taking some time to extend this. I know we're past. It looks like most of the scholars have. I know a lot of people have classes or other commitments. Usually at 7 o'clock, everyone heads right out. But I do have this recorded, so I'll share this with all of you. If you have personal questions, feel free to reach out to any of the current fellows or former fellows. I'm sure they'd be happy to, especially cohorts 1 and 2, who really had to figure it out on their own. So I'm sure they'd be happy to answer any questions that you all have. Again, the drive with all of your contact information, please make sure that's up to date so that people can reach you. And I will see a lot of you tomorrow. Juniors, cohort 4, you're welcome to come to the meeting tomorrow as well to hear this again, or maybe a slightly different variation or other questions that might come up. But I want to say a huge thank you to all of you, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks and bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Sorry, Sam, I was hopping on and off. Work has been so crazy.
That's okay, Claire. I hope you're doing well, and hopefully tomorrow, I don't know if you're...
I'm not working tomorrow. I didn't think I was
Okay.
running a phone bank right now, and then I found out I was.
Oh, that's okay. You'll be able to share tomorrow, and I'll make both of the recordings available. Some people are participating tomorrow that couldn't participate tonight, so yeah, and people will be able to watch them and rewatch them as it's more relevant, as they're kind of like going through the different phases. So
Okay, that sounds good. Sam, I actually have a question for you really quick.
Yeah.
That's related to this that I've been meaning to ask you. So it's really weird. I'm feeling very like out of my box with this particular opportunity. So there's a college in Colorado Springs called University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. And I recently saw a job posting for a position being the director of their civics department. I was just reading the job description and I was like, oh, this is really cool.